Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 53, and the text for today is text 35. We can chant responsively. Evam Rajnam Sametanam Yata Viryam Yata Vayahi Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Kamai Samarhayat Evam Rajnam Sametanam Yata Viryam Yata Vayahi Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Karmai Samarhayat Evam Rajnam Sametanam Yata Viryam Yata Vayahi Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Kamai Samarhayat. Please chant. Evam Rajnam Sametanam Avirya Yata Vayahi Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Kamai Samarayat Evam Rajnam Sametanam Yata Virya Yata Vaya Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Kamai Samarayat Evam Rajnam Sametanam Aviryam Yata Vaya Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Kamai Samarayat Evam Rajnam Sametanam Yata Virya Yata Vaya Balam Yata Balam Sarvai Kamai Samayayat Evam Rajnam Sametanam Yata Virya Yata Vaya Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Kamai Samarayat Evam Rajam Sametanam Yata Viryam Yata Vaya Yata Balam Yata Vitam Sarvai Kamai Samayat Evam Rajam Sametanam Yata Viryam Yata Vaya, Yata Balam Yata Vitam, Sarvaika Samayat. And the word for word, Evam, thus, Rajnam, for the kings, Sametanam, who had assembled, Yata, according, Viryam, to their power, Yata, according, Vaya, to their age, Yata, according, Balam, to their strength, Yata, according, Vitam, to their wealth, Sarvai, with all, Kamai, desirable things, Samarhayat, he honored them. And the translation for text 35 is as follows. Thus it was that Bhishmaka gave all desirable things to the kings who had assembled for the occasion, honoring them as befitted their political power, age, physical prowess, and wealth. Om Jnanatimirandasya Gnanjana Shlakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bando Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavanishvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaham Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimata Ramapada Swami Iti Namine Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimata Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Navishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So no commentary on this particular verse, but it's very much interconnected to the previous verses, particularly the last three. So the verse says that King Bhishmaka gave all desirable things to the kings who had assembled for the occasion, honoring them as befitted their political power, their age, their physical prowess, and their wealth. So that's the text for today. And going back a little bit, because after all, he's in the position to receive the guests that are coming, to be present at the wedding of his daughter, Rukmini, to Shishupal, who was to be the groom. So, backtracking a little bit, to Krishna and Balaram, there's mention of what he specifically gave. And it says he gave Madhuparka, new clothing, and other desirable gifts. And he worshipped them according to standard rituals. So that was in text 33, so just 2 texts back. And there's also mention that generous King Bhishmaka arranged opulent accommodations for the 2 lords and also for their army and entourage In this way, he afforded them proper hospitality. So that was text 34, just the previous text. So serving the Vaishnavas in particular is considered glorious. And here King Bhishmaka is serving the kings. Princess Rukmini, much further along, we're going to hear that she actually comes to pray to Ambika, the wife of Lord Shiva. And this is her particular prayer. O Mother Ambika, wife of Lord Shiva, I repeatedly offer my obeisances unto you together with your children. May Lord Krishna become my husband. Please grant that. So here's the particular unusual component in the whole scenario. It's unknown to King Bhishmaka that Rukmini has made a whole plan, that she has already sent a Brahmana requesting Krishna to kidnap her, so to completely extract her from all these arrangements that have been made. So the Rukmini at that time, she worshipped the goddess, and this is interesting because it's connected to the verses of very much of what is being given as desirable objects to a worshipable personality. So she worshipped the goddess with water, scents, whole grains, incense, clothing, garlands, necklaces, jewelry, and other prescribed offerings and gifts, and also with arrays of lamps. The Brahmana woman, at that time when she's in the temple, so we're going to come to this very shortly, they each performed worship simultaneously with the same items, also offering savories, cakes, prepared betel nut, sacred threads, fruit, and sugarcane juice. So I'm highlighting this because mention is made that there's a standard ritual that's used in worship. And it's mentioned in relation to King Bhishmaka and his worship of Lord Krishna and Balaram. So we can take it that there's a standard form of worship. So there's a meditation. Usually worship begins with meditation in the mind. So before worship, there's particularly Radha Krishna, there's usually worship of their abode, where they're residing. So we've just heard this whole scenario that's been created by King Bhishmaka, creating arrangements, accommodation for kings, their armies, the particular items he's bringing to Krishna and Balaram, something of the items that his daughter Rukmini is offering to goddess Ambika. And I'm going to explore a little bit more in detail this idea of standard worship. So thinking of the abode of Krishna and Balaram, I'm going to read 2 lines. This is usually meditation in the mind that has to precede worship. So just reading 4 lines, and I'll read the Sanskrit and then give the translation. Tato Vrindavanam Jayayet Paramanada Vandanam Sarva Vartu Kusumo Petam Patatri Gana Naditam Brahmad Brahmara Ihankara Mukhan Krita Din Mukham Kalindi Jala Kalola Sangi Manuta Sevitam Vrindavan Dham. Yeah, I'll stop there. So this is the translation. So this is the mental meditation. Vrindavan Dham is an abode of ever-increasing joy. In that transcendental land grows flowers and fruits of all seasons, and various birds fill it with sweet sounds. Cool breezes and the Yamuna's waters enhance the atmosphere, and all directions resound with the humming of bumblebees. Vrindavan is decorated with wish-fulfilling trees, enhanced by many varieties of flowers bearing creepers, and its divine beauty is ornamented with a pollen of red, blue, and white lotuses. So the meditation goes on, but I'm giving a little beginning part. And then usually the meditation proceeds where one is actually meditating on the form of the Lord, seated on a throne. So again, there's an appropriate mantra that's said, Divyad Vrindaranya Kalpa Drumadaha Srimad Ratnagara Simhasana Sthana. There's 2 more lines, but this is the meditation on the Lord seated on his throne. So we're hearing that the king, upon hearing that Krishna and Balaram had come, and that they had come particularly because they were eager to witness his daughter's wedding, he immediately went forth with abundant offerings to greet them. So we don't hear what his internal meditation is, but in deity worship, usually the first thing one does, so we're hearing the king goes forth with various offerings. So if one draws a parallel between worship of Lord Krishna and Balaram and our worship of Krishna, Srimati Radharani, we don't have Lord Balaram here, but yes, there are temples with Krishna Balaram. Usually one first obtains purified water. So this is called Vishesha Agriya, Stapan. And one places a conch on a stand and fills it with fresh water and then purifies the conch with water from a water spout onto the fingers of the right hand and shows 3 mudras and invokes the sacred rivers into the conch. So remember the meditation had been, there's the presence of the Yamuna Vrindavan. So actually this is how one actually practically starts performing the worship. The rivers are invoked to arrive into the water in a conch. So one shows some mudras and invokes the sacred rivers, and then one invokes the deity. Again, one is using a mantra and a mudra. And then one is offering worship to the Lord within the conch, offering flower petals and chandan. So we have small Radha Krishna. So I have this regular experience of recent times. There's a lady who's got completely absorbed in the water that comes from the bathing of the deities. She brings her water bottles, tells me, she's got her water bottles, and I have to escort her down so that she can get water that comes from the bathing of the deities. We used to have it in the temple before COVID, but obviously because of the transmission of that particular illness, it's not kept here any longer. But the lady was most intrigued because she can taste that there's sandalwood in the water, and she didn't know what else. But when the deities are worshipped, so drawing a parallel, we're just hearing that the king is bringing various offerings. So in the worship of small Radha Krishna, one welcomes their lordships, just like the king's immediately going forth to welcome Krishna and Balaram. And we hear that King Bhishmaka, he greeted their lordships. So water to wash the lordship's lotus feet is offered, that's Padya. And then Agra, water is offered to their hands so they themselves can sprinkle it on their heads. So, remember, we've got the sacred water. It has been, from the conch, it's usually transferred into a little water container. So when you're offering it to the deities, they're actually sprinkling the water from all the sacred rivers onto their heads. So, and Achman follows. So one is actually offering the deities water that they can purify their own mouths. And then comes Madhuparka, and this is what we heard that the king offered to Krishna and Balaram. So I'm drawing a parallel with our deity worship. Madhuparka is a liquid that's drunk. So after the deities have purified their mouths, we offer them Madhuparka. It's again not the actual drinking liquid. It's usually done that you're chanting the mantra, and the understanding is that the liquid that's been offered in a spoon to the deities is Madhuparka. So they then get to drink Madhuparka. The king actually brings Madhuparka to Krishna and Balaram. So proceeding with worship of their lordships in deity form, there's a water offered again for sipping. So, after we drink something, we go and wash our mouths. So again, the deities get offered some water. They can wash their mouths after they've drunk Madhuparka. And then comes the removal of the clothing of the deities and the cleansing of their bodies, usually with some soft cloth, because one wants to remove a tulsi leaf that may be there from a previous day, or some sandalwood paste that may be there. And then one wraps them in towels or gamshas. So now, of course, what we're hearing is that the king is offering clothing to Krishna and Balaram. So it must be that there's understanding of the standard ritual, because there's a procedure. So I'm going through the step-by-step process, which makes sense. So just we're hearing this detail and that detail that the king is offering to Krishna and Balaram. So with deity worship, the deities are escorted to their bathing place, and they're offered shoes. So usually you indicate that you're going to move the deity by offering shoes. And the next offering is of fragrant oil, which is usually rubbed over the bodies of the deities. So even in regular body maintenance, one may utilize oil for massaging the body. This allows for any toxins that have accumulated from undigested foodstuffs, or toxins that come from thoughts that concern one. It gets into the body in the form of toxins. So massaging helps to move that so that it actually gets released from the body. So then the deities are bathed. So water is poured from the conch and a bell is rung. And Subhakrit mentioned this yesterday because he just touched on, the whole day's external deity worship. I'm going a little bit more into the internal worship. While the deities are bathed, usually one is chanting the Govinda prayers from Brahma Samhita. So one may say, Chintamani Prakara Sadmashu Kalpa Vriksha, Lakshivarteshu Surabirabir Abhipalayantam, Lakshmi Sahasra Sata Sambrama Sevayanam, Govindam Aripurusham Tamaham Bhajami. I worship Govinda, the primeval Lord, the first progenitor, who is tending cows, yielding all desires among abodes built with spiritual gems and surrounded by millions of desire trees. He is always served with great reverence and affection by hundreds and thousands of Lakshmis or Gopis. So, one keeps up the meditation on who the Lord is and where he's actually situated through one's deity worship. Now, we hear a detail from King Bhishmaka. King Bhishmaka presented Krishna and Balaram, so he's got them in person. It's not in a deity form. He's got them in person, and he presents them with Madhuparka, we heard, new clothing, and other desirable gifts. So that's what the mention is. So after the bathing or worship of the Lord in his deity form, one then offers the clothing. So, and it's usually fresh clothing, and that's vastram. So there's a whole sequence of things that are offered, again, with the clothing. So we don't hear the detail of King Bhishmaka, but it says he did standard ritualistic worship. So following on the offering of clothing, there's offering of a sacred thread, upavitam, because Krishna also has his Gayatri mantra that he's going to chant on his thread. So he's offered the thread. He's offered water for sipping, the achman, and tilak follows. So one places tilak on the body of the deity. So these standard rituals of worship mentioned in relation to the worship of their lordships by King Bhishmaka, it's present in deity worship, and following on the placing of tilak on the bodies of the deities, there's the offering of ornaments. And we hear from Rukmini's worship of goddess Ambika. She was offering necklaces and ornaments. So she may not have been bathing the deity or doing deity worship, but she's arriving with those gifts, and the pujari will be using that in this kind of sequence. Garlands are offered, and then the hair is arranged of Krishna. So one actually, makes sure that his hair's in place and it's combed nicely, and same for Srimati Radharani, or if it was Lord Balaram. Further items of worship may be chandan if it's warm, mixed with scents. So that's what's present. If one goes downstairs and takes water that has come from the deities, you're actually going to taste the chandan, the sandalwood, and also some camphor. Told to me by the pujari that that's how it's done. So there's some camphor in it too. So the chandan mixed with scents is offered. That's called gandaha. And flower petals are given to the lotus feet of the deities, pushpan. So one can imagine that the king would also have been offering flowers to the lotus feet of Krishna and Balaram. It's very standard worship. And tulsi leaves are given. It may be one or several. Now, further standard rituals involve the offering of incense, the dupe, a gilang, deep, and a plate of preparations, including water for the lordships to wash their mouths. So we hear that the Brahmana ladies, when Rukmini was worshipping goddess Ambika, they had bought cakes and sugarcane juice for the deity. So one may offer fruit and sweets to the deities, a simple offering. And that's usually in the morning after the bathing. It's obviously not going to be a heavy meal, it's something light. And Rukmini had also gone to worship goddess Ambika very early in the morning. We heard that. So hence you hear the same thing, cake, sweets, sugarcane juice, very simple morning offerings. So there's a statement by Lord Shiva who does an analysis of the glories of serving Lord Krishna versus, say, worshipping demigods and even devotees. And this is how he puts it, and he's addressing his wife. So the same personality the goddess Rukmini has gone to worship, Lord Shiva is addressing his wife, and this is how he does his analysis. My dear Devi, although the Vedas mention worship of demigods, the worship of Lord Vishnu is topmost and is ultimately recommended. However, above the worship of Lord Vishnu is the rendering of service to Vaishnavas who are related to Lord Vishnu. So that's from Padma Purana. I extracted it from our deity worship book, the Pancharatra Pradipam. So King Bhishmaka, he he's offering respects to the kings present, who are in their thousands. That's what we heard. There's actually thousands of kings who have come. By giving them desirable things, that's the mention. So there are 4 basic ways to serve a Vaishnava. One is giving a seat. That's kind of the reception of the Vaishnava. The second is washing their feet. That's showing respect. The third is hearing from the Vaishnava. That's the association part. And the fourth is assisting the Vaishnava in any way that the Vaishnava may need assistance. So we hear King Bhishmaka, how he did the assisting of Krishna and Balaram was he actually provided very beautiful accommodation for the armies of Krishna and Balaram. And it's said that they were elaborate accommodations. So usually you might think, armies camp outside the city in some rudimentary kind of arrangement. Not so with King Bhishmaka's arrangement, because he's serving. So he actually gives the armies very beautiful accommodation. There's mention of that. So that's assisting in any way. It's a means of serving the Vaishnava. Of course, he was serving Krishna and Balaram directly, but he did the same for the other kings. He actually provided newly erected accommodation for the kings and their armies. Of course, it's the transcendentally situated Vaishnava who's advanced in spiritual knowledge, who's most deserving, one could say, of respect, reception, and worship, regardless of their varna and their ashram, or their age, or any external condition. Now, serving the Vaishnava is an important limb of devotional service. So, one, if one's an advanced devotee, needs to identify the Vaishnavas. One needs to respect a person who's been initiated by a bona fide spiritual master and who's situated on the transcendental platform, who's chanting the holy name with faith and is offering obeisances and is following the instructions of the spiritual master. There has to be respect for such a personality. And if one's a person further on the spiritual path, one can actually start to make distinctions between the Vaishnavas, and it's just by means of knowing how to behave correctly with different Vaishnavas. Now, in particular, it's the duty of a householder, the Grahasta, in the Grahasta ashram, to offer respects to devoted Vaishnavas. Particularly, it's the duty of householders. And King Bhishmaka obviously was in the householder ashram. He was just marrying off his daughter. So he's performing his duty by all these various arrangements he's making to serve the Vaishnavas. Now, Srila Prabhupada explains the offering of respect or honoring a Vaishnava. And this is how Srila Prabhupada puts it. People in general must always respectfully honor saintly persons. It is ordered that as soon as one sees a Vaishnava or even a sannyasi, the topmost ashram, one should immediately offer respects to such a holy person. If one forgets to show respect in this way, one must observe a fast for that day. This is a Vedic injunction. One must be extremely careful to refrain from committing offenses to the lotus feet of a devotee or saintly person. So this comes from a purport in the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 9th chapter, the 96th verse, Srila Prabhupada, of, the consciousness that has to be there to actually immediately offer respects to a saintly personality. And of course, that one is so responsible about it that if one somehow overlooked it through some distraction, that one actually fasts that particular day. So there's a beautiful description of what makes a Vaishnava. And this is the description. So it's a section that's dealing with King Bhagirath. So this is how the verse goes, and it explains something of what makes a Vaishnava. Those who are saintly because of devotional service and are therefore in the renounced order, free from material desires, and who are pure devotees, expert in following the regulative principles mentioned in the Vedas, are always glorious and pure in behavior, and are able to deliver all fallen souls. When such pure devotees bathe in your water, the Ganges, the sinful reactions accumulated from other people will certainly be counteracted, for such devotees always keep in the core of their hearts the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who can vanquish all sinful reactions. So that explains why the particular personality is saintly. They're carrying the Supreme Personality of Godhead in their hearts. And by virtue of that, because Lord Krishna can destroy any sinful reaction, that's what makes that devotee an elevated Vaishnava. Their very presence can actually destroy sinful reactions. And the mention here of King Bhagirath talking about the Ganges is that, it's a kind of ritualistic practice to go to a sacred river so that one can discard one's sins. The saintly person can actually destroy those sins just by their presence. So, going back to King Bhishmaka, he was actually drawing distinctions in the way he was honoring the kings. So one can generalize and say that all Vaishnavas, even ordinary Vaishnavas, I've just been describing the topmost Vaishnavas, or what makes a topmost Vaishnava, even ordinary Vaishnavas, one can say that they need to be honored. So there's an ordinary Vaishnava maybe just be a person who's chanting the holy names, who has a certain degree of faith and a certain realization of the Supreme Lord. So it's all sort of, I don't know if quantified is the right word, but a degree of. However, respect shown may be more or less elaborate according to the degree of advancement of the devotee being received, because we're hearing King Bhishmaka is making distinctions. So even to Vaishnavas in the least advanced category, one may show outward respect and offer polite words, but one may avoid their association. Perfectly permissible, because there may be persons that one outwardly shows respects, offers polite words, but one knows that the character is not very good because the degree of their advancement is very little, so they may be exhibiting very bad behavior, actually. So one is permitted to not take their association. That's quite in order. Now, the ordinary Vaishnava is one who believes in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, but does not practice strictly. So that one gets exposed to that quite frequently. So another ordinary Vaishnava is one who accepts the markings of a Vaishnava and respects the Vaishnavas, but does not practice strictly themselves. And then there's a third category of an ordinary Vaishnava, and that's one who's born in a Vaishnava family, and wears the marks of a Vaishnava, but does not practice strictly. So, in all cases, they are not practicing strictly. So, again, one can be respectful to the person, but it's perfectly in order to not take their association. So, anyway, King Bhishmaka, he was looking at external markings of the kings on a sort of, you could say, material level, because he was considering what's the age of the person. He was considering what's their level of wealth, and also what's their level of power or degree of power. And that's how what amount of things he was offering was in accord with the degree of wealth or their power or their influence. But I've gone into the angle of Vaishnavas and going from the very topmost to the very ordinary, and how you make the distinction, and what's the appropriate functioning, and how you can even make up for it if you should make a mistake. So I've come up to there. This was just a brief exploration of a verse that didn't have a purport, and I kind of made the connection with the previous two verses. If there's any thought on the subject matter or some contribution to a discussion.
Thank you, Krsnarcana. It's always very nice to go through, these two very essential aspects of our, Krishna conscious life, which is deity worship and Vaishnava etiquette. These two things are, part of learning the whole culture of Krishna consciousness, So it's very, very important for all devotees. So thank you. One thing that maybe you can, clarify or go a little deeper is this last point on how we can deal with devotees who are not necessarily, who have faith, who are devotees, Vaishnavas, but not necessarily practicing or having, what's the word? Not practicing strictly. That's how you say. It's a practice, but not strictly. And the idea that not necessarily taking the association, and at the same time, there is the important injunction on Vaishnava etiquette and Vaishnava relationships with those who are less advanced. We devotees should, part of showing, or cultivating that relationship is that one is helping, one is kind, and also, try to help, or the compassion is an element that is recommended in that case. One extends oneself like that. There is another mention that Srila Prabhupada says that we don't necessarily situations that we discriminate of not taking association, but rather we give association. So there's a situation of giving association rather to taking association in these cases. So these are all recommendations on how to be able to relate to different, as you mentioned, King Bhishmaka is doing, different types of different type of kings, different type of Vaishnavas, you relate in different ways. So specifically, maybe, this idea of Is it not taking association means, rejecting or, like that? Or, what exactly can we make that apparent, contradiction of not taking association and at the same time, being compassionate and extending oneself and giving oneself to help others,
Yes, it's an interesting question because, there's the association involves loving exchanges in spiritual life. So the giving of gifts, the receiving of gifts, the sharing of confidences, the hearing of confidences. So there's a connection that is both on the material level and on the emotional, subtle, mental level. That is taking association. There's an interconnectedness. So, one could ask the question, okay, are you not going to have any loving exchanges with an ordinary Vaishnava who's not following strictly? It means that they may not be chanting. They may not be, concerned with rules and regulations. Maybe they follow regulative principles, broadly speaking. One doesn't know. But certainly not being concerned perhaps with Vedic injunctions, not being concerned with study of the scriptures and knowing what should be done, what shouldn't be done. So there's that question, are you going to be involved in loving exchanges with a person who's not practicing strictly? I think it's a little difficult to do so because it means that the person is functioning largely on a material level. So this means that there's going to be misunderstanding, inevitably, between a strict practitioner and somebody who doesn't have strict practices. There's going to be misunderstanding because the person who doesn't have strict practices, first of all, won't have a proper understanding of what should be done, what shouldn't be done. So how one reaches out, if one's an intermediate devotee, that one can make distinction, one can understand, oh, this person is not a strict practitioner. How one can be helpful to the person is being very careful to assess where their devotional interest lies, perhaps, and giving a little bit of room for that to flourish. So the person may like kirtan. So some room to flourish, but again, one understands that the degree of intimacy that can be there is very little. There's not going to be proper understanding of what one offers. There's not going to be proper reception. Because the person lacks both the knowledge and the practices that allow for reciprocation from Krishna to fuel an understanding of proper behavior, even. So it's quite a restricted kind of interaction that can happen. This is what I'm understanding, just knowing that one is dealing with a paucity of knowledge and understanding on the part of the person.
Yes, that's very well put. There is a danger, though, that comes from taking the position of making judgments, and the position of having the capacity of discriminating is the intermediate level of Vaishnavas, which is the Madhyama Adhikari. And to have that level, 75% of the unwanted things from within the heart have to be already purified. So you only have 25% to go if we would make those, the calculation like that, which means quite advanced. The Madhyama Adhikari is quite an advanced devotee. That's for the Madhyama Adhikari, his faith now becomes Nishta, and his practices become Nishta, which is steady, meaning that now those practices are the strictness is very steady. It doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't go to, ups and downs. They have the proper capacity of making discrimination. Now, for the Kanishta Adhikari, the practices, the vows, all the things, they go to this Anishtata Bhakti, which is unsteady, then the power of discrimination is questionable. So then, if we are not in an advanced level, and we start to make judgments of, this person, I'm better than this person, this person is not, it's dangerous, although we still have to exercise discrimination. But we also have to be mindful that my power of discrimination, I have to make sure to be under the directions of, advanced devotees, to make sure that I'm not, acting in this, what's the term that Prabhupada uses, I think, whimsical type of mentality of passing judgments and things like that on others. It's safer to be situated in a position of always respecting. So that's the principle that you brought, as part of the culture, to be respectful and, to cultivate some of the other qualities of a Vaishnava that we're trying to absorb and to acquire. Respect, tolerance, humility, all these type of things.
Yeah. I mean, you highlighted the danger of falling into judgment or being judgmental. Well, being judgmental is on the ego plane. So it means that one has slipped off that fine line of being strict in one's spiritual practices in some way if one has fallen into ego space. So being able to make discriminations is different from being judgmental. I mean, judgmental is, it's on the ego plane. It has more to do with, in some way, trying to aggrandize oneself or put oneself in a higher position than someone. So it's motivated by ego. So that's very unhealthy. But that's different from, having both the knowledge and the understanding and the compassion and the caring and the respect, and then making discrimination. That's different. Because it's coming from the right place, it's on the spiritual plane, it's coming from a place of caring. So quite different from being judgmental. Yeah. So thank you for drawing attention to the necessity for making that distinction. Well, thank you very much for your very kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.